It lies beyond the western pines toward the sinking sun. And not a survey mark defines the bounds of Brumbys Run. On odds and ends and mountain land, on tracks and range and rock, where no one else can make a stand, old Brumby rears his stock. A wild, unhandled lot they are, of every shape and breed. They venture out neath moon and stars, along the flats to feed. But when the dawn makes pink the sky and steals along the plain, Brumby horses turn and fly toward the hills again. The traveller by the mountain track may hear their hoofbeats pass and catch a glimpse of brown and black dim shadows on the grass. The eager stock horse pricks his ears and lifts his head on high in wild excitement when he hears the Brumby mob go by. Old Brumby asks no price or fee o'er all his wide domains. The man who yards his stock is free to keep them for his pains. So off to scour the mountainside with eager eyes aglow, to strongholds where the wild mobs hide, the gully rakers go. A rush of horses through the trees, a red shirt making play, a sound of stopwicks on the breeze. They vanish far away. Ah me, before our day is done, we long with bitter pain to ride once more on Brumbys Run and yard his mob again. Population numbers needed to be reduced immediately.
I see that piece of literature by Banjo Patterson, the adventure and the spirit of adventure that was involved in that poem lingers on from the 1870s. It really is, it is embedded now in Australia's culture. This connection, though it may be romantic, there's no question that all animals will have an impact on the environment, including the two-legged human type. And the horses are no different. And it's all about managing numbers, and whether it be kangaroos or whether it be wombats or wallabies or brumbies, or whatever it is. The numbers need to be managed, and we want to ensure that the precious mountains that surround us are not damaged by the brumbies or any other animal. And to a large degree, there's contests now for the land that's available in the Kosciuszko National Park between deer and rabbits and other feral animals. I don't deny that there is an impact there, and there will always be an impact from anybody or any animal which inhabits the Snowy Mountains. We've got to manage it.
They said no mare or foals would be culled. This just simply wasn't true.
What's happened is in the mountains is that there are areas in the mountains which are not burnt. And if you look closely at the areas that are not burnt, you'll find that that's the areas which are inhabited by the greatest number of brumbies, and there's a good reason for that. The reason is that the brumbies keep the fuel levels down, and anybody that has anything to do with bushfires, and I'm a former fire control officer in the region, will know that if you reduce the fuel that's available to the fire, you reduce the environmental impact. And that's a critical element in managing bushfire. So passive grazing, using the Brumbies to keep the fuel levels down, is in fact protecting the vegetation and the available food source for the native animals. Absolute devastation up there. There are areas that are left aside where there is grass growing. You'll find the Brumbies are there, but you'll also find the native animals are there. And you'll go into the areas that were totally destroyed. There's not only no vegetation there for the animals, there's no animals because they were burnt. What's happened is that the Brumbies have provided this haven for the native animals. That's fact. Twice in 17 years, we've had total destruction of our vegetation and a huge loss of wildlife across the national park as a consequence of poor fire management. And the way forward for this is there has to be an acknowledgement by fire managers and national park managers that science is not the answer if they're getting false information fed into the scientific model. Science is only as good as the information is fed into it. And if you're getting false information in, you're getting false information out. You have to allow animals to graze in the area, whether it be cattle or whether it be horse or whatever it is. They have to be able to graze to keep the vegetation down on the forest floor. You have to allow loggers in to thin the forests out. These sorts of things are management practices that are not being engaged in at the moment, and the consequence of that is just annihilation of one of the greatest national parks in the world. And they have to learn that fire is the greatest threat to our national parks.
As many as 5,000 feral horses need to be removed each year.
I draw comparisons between the flight of the Brumby with the flight of the eagle. The Snowy Mountains Brumby and the experience I've had with them is very close to my heart. Those who've had that experience in the mountains of seeing them in the wild and seeing a mother grooming her foal, to see the stallions contesting the rights to the mares. There are very few places now in the world where the horse is actually living in a native habitat, undisturbed by human. And this is very much the case with the Snowy Mountains Brumby, that they've got this area up there where horses can actually adapt to all of their native instincts. Though they're not native to Australians, they have developed all the characteristics of a native animal in its native state.
It's cost effective.
I've seen the counts that have been offered to the Community Advisory Panel and the Scientific Panel. The estimation of 25,000 horses is outrageously wrong. The numbers of the horses have been aerial counted by private operators. The fact is that the count that they got up there, where they claimed to be in the vicinity of 4,000 or 5,000 horses, there were less than 1,200. Aerial culling is barbaric, it's cruel, it leaves the horses wounded, and it's just not acceptable in any terms in the state. In fact, it's going on right at this moment. As we're recording this, it's going on today, I believe.
Native or an introduced species.
There'll always be opposing opinions on the management of horses at the Kosciuszko National Park, and so long as the legislation remains in place and there is provision there for management plan to be put in place to manage the horses, the sustainable numbers are established and maintained. So long as that occurs, then the opportunity is there for the people of Australia to continue for generations to come to enjoy the presence of the Snowy Mountains Brumby. Now, if there's a change of government and the government of the day determines that they'll repeal the legislation and change the management practices that are up there, it will be at risk. The horses will be at risk. If you get extremist groups, particularly on the environmental side, who continue to campaign for the extinction of the horses out of the national park, then the debate will go on. Those people that are involved in Reclaim Kosci and others have a genuine passion for the management of the park, as we do. We come from a different angle. Yeah, I get it that there are people who believe that the Brumbies are doing damage to the park, but the fact is that if they're going to apply the same logic to all of the horses, all of the animals in the park, then you also take into account native animals as well as those animals which are introduced. And I'd particularly place emphasis on the deer and the pigs and the goats. We've got a plan in place which is a piece of legislation which we advocated as a solution to this problem for the management of the Brumbies. There is no such thing being advocated by the environmental groups like Reclaim Kosci for the management of the pigs and the deer and the goats and those other animals, and they should get off their bums and go and do it. Well, there are those groups that I see that are opposed to almost anything which is unnatural, that the answer to the environmental management is to lock it up and leave it. Well, that just can't happen because land has to be managed. What we have to do is apply the adaptive management principles, acknowledge that there is an issue there to be dealt with, work out how you manage that issue. You have to accept the fact that they're there and then draw up a management plan to deal with them. That's what we've done with the Snowy Mountains Brumby. That's what needs to be done across the park. It's a symbol of freedom. Wild in the mountains and free. There are very few places now in the world where the horse is actually living in a native habitat, undisturbed by humans. Though they're not native to Australians, they have developed all the characteristics of a native animal in its native state.
Feral horse numbers have increased by an average of 23%.
Twice in 17 years, we've had total destruction of our vegetation. Consequence of that is just annihilation of one of the greatest national parks in the world. Fire is the greatest threat to our national parks. There's no question that all animals will have an impact on the environment, including the two-legged human type. And it's all about managing numbers. But the Brumbies' impact is minimal. The estimation of 25,000 horses is outrageously wrong. The fact is that the numbers of the horses have been aerial counted by private operators. Aerial culling is barbaric, it's cruel, it leaves the horses wounded, and it's just not acceptable in any terms in this state.
Aerial culling is carried out because population numbers needed to be reduced immediately, and it's cost effective.
That sort of behaviour is not acceptable in today's modern attitude towards humane treatment of animals. It's just not acceptable. They won't be forgiven by the Australian people. There are those groups that I see that are opposed to almost anything which is unnatural,
Horses can become distressed if they're chased by a helicopter, and there's always the chance that the animal would not be killed immediately after it is shot.
What we have to do is apply the adaptive management principles, acknowledge that there is an issue there to be dealt with, work out how you manage that issue.
Aerial shooting is cost effective and is the most humane way to control the feral horse population.
There is no such thing being advocated by the environmental groups like Reclaim Cozzy for the management of the pigs and the deer and the goats and those other animals, and they should get off their bums and go and do it. And it's going to be very difficult for any government or anybody to get those Brumbies out of the Snowy Mountains.
It's no longer a question of whether aerial culling is cruel or not. It's a question of what does the public value more, native or an introduced species.